Esther 1. This is what happened during the time of Esther, the Esters who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes regained from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officers. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of provinces were present. For full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor of glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king had a banquet lasting 7 days in the excluded garden of the king's palace, for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the city of Susa. The garden had a hanging of white and blue lion, fastened with the coarse and white lion, the purple material, 2 silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of served in a goblet of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant in keeping with the king's liberty. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, but the king instructed all the wine stirred in to serve each man what he wished. King Abasti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace to the king's sisters. On the 7th day, when King Cyrus was in the high spirit from wine, he commanded the 7 inches who served him, Maryland Bitches, Harbonageto, Absajator, and Cassius, to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing a royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult exerted in matters of law, justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were close to the king. Shoshakshatar, Amsa, and Termes, Mercia, Manas, and Malcolm, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to King Abashad? He asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that entrusted has taken to her. Then America replied on the presence of the king and nobles. Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the people of all the provinces of King Xerxes, for the queen's conduct will become unknown to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who had heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to distract in the discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the law of Persia and Media, which stand in the law of Persia and Media, which cannot be replaced, that Baasha is never against to enter the presence of King Ashura. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his powerful realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least of the greatest. The king and the nobles were pleased with the advice, so the king did as the merchant proposed. He sent a dispatch to all the parts of the kingdom, to each province in their own script and each people in his own language, proclaiming in all each people's tongue that every man should be ruled over his own household. 2. Later, when the king of Vashti was suspended, he remembered Vashti and what she had done to what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, lest a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the homes of the circle of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who in the charge of the women, and let beauty treasures be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice repulsed the king, and he followed it. Now there was a citizen of Susa, a Jewess in the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jael, the son of Shemiah, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among these taken captive with Jericho, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely and born of an butcher, and Mordecai had taken her on a daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the shelter of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also had taken to the king's palace and instructed Heather, who had charge in the harem, and the girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Before a girl's turn came to go in the king's service, she was to complete the 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the woman, 6 months with oil and a mixture of 6 with perfumes and cosmetic. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another place, and having to carry Shagus, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her back by name. When the turn of Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abner, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than Haggai. What the king in his head was in the charge of harem suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Jairus in the royal residence of the 10th month, the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any other woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any other virgins. So he sent a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave the great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officers. He proclaimed the holiday throughout the province of the district, a gift with royal liberty. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions, as she had done with her bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Betty and Tertia, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told King Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the reported with the ambassador and bound to the 2 officers who were hanging on the gallery. All this was recorded in the book of the annals of the presence of the king.